So a little bit of an unconventional start for me with some design delve inside baseball for you. So I've had this huge level design breakdown video for Hitman planned for months now because I honestly think it's some of the greatest the industry has ever produced, and when 007 First Light was announced to be developed by the Hitman devs IOI, I thought, well, why don't I just hold off a bit and see if I could do the same thing for some 007 level design, because it's obviously going to be as impressive, right? Right? Well, to my surprise, it was a bit of a downgrade in comparison. The Hitman fan in me wanted it to be more like Hitman, but the designer in me was glad it wasn't. Yeah, it's all going to make sense in a second, but this is going to be a bit of a half design analysis and criticism and half praise for how these seemingly regressive designs actually better fit the Fleming formula. But before we dive into that Flem pit, what makes Hitman so special to warrant this kind of baby behavior from me? Well, Hitman is a game about hitting men or women in hard-to-reach places. You disguise, infiltrate, hit said men, exfiltrate, repeat, but in different settings and situations, and this may seem formulaic on face value, that's because it is, but the beauty of its systems lies in its improvisation and hidden guidance to its more engaging encounters. Because if you're lucky, you could just walk in, shoot your target and walk out, but how its patrolling guards seemingly blocked routes of infiltration and ever-moving target schedules forces the players to constantly adapt to an ever-unfolding situation. The closer the player gets to their goals, the more this chaos compounds. The player can understand their goal of reaching and eliminating their target, but as they venture to reach them, they encounter blockades that require certain keys for locked doors or specific tools for NPC manipulation or assassination, forcing players to further explore for these items. But in doing so, they stumble upon different solutions or routes, presenting new ways of progressing in a way that they didn't first think of. Because of this, it just feels endlessly organic and replayable. Yeah, this being perfectly evident by the game showing the player how much they missed at the end of each mission, some of them having up to 32 distinct ways to eliminate just a single target. This level of freedom is insane. Now, when we zoom out and look at this, you can see how this format would really lend itself to the espionage improvisation of the James Bond formula, especially after 007 First Light's announcement. They shadow dropped James Bond themed Hitman missions just to give us a bit of a taste, but I should have seen the writing on the wall when its 007 mission was decent, but still the most linear of the entire roster, because first and foremost, it had a narrative to tell. And the Hitman formula is mechanically stellar, but suffers in its ability to tell a linear story because of its mechanical non-linearity. Hence why most of Hitman's narrative revelations happen between missions inside cutscenes. The tales of James Bond's adventures are better suited for something like Uncharted, and that's exactly what they did, a mixture of Hitman level design sensibilities and the bombastic storytelling of Uncharted, which on paper is a perfect fit. Nothing encapsulates this better than with Bond's first proper mission under MI6, with all the time in the world. While his colleagues attempt to locate the mysterious 009, James is relegated to keeping the bloody car warm, but in doing so, spots some suspicious behaviour from some blonde twat. This sets up an intriguing and unfolding narrative and gives the player a target to pursue, and while inside, this environment has all the trappings of a Hitman level, disguise and infiltrate, but its narrative focus completely changes its level design. Unlike in Hitman, where the player is free to approach its tasks in whatever way they see fit, to leave space for narrative beats to hit and drive the plot forward, the developers have to funnel its players towards specific areas rather than letting them just aimlessly explore. This is commonly done via James being told where to go via his handler Moneypenny or through mutterings to himself. Through this, the player is given a goal of accessing a specific area, and upon reaching it, they are delivered a narrative revelation which gives them a new goal within the same location. This is compelling in its own right and gives the player guaranteed time with its supporting cast of characters, but is a lot more linear and removes a bunch of the player-driven choice in how to tackle these situations. Yes, there are usually multiple avenues to reach these areas, different people to eavesdrop on for clues, routes to take and tools to use, but they're directing you in the same direction and solution. They sacrifice some player choice for more narrative depth, and I think that's a worthy trade-off in this situation specifically, but I think it falls down with how those paths are accessed and how the world reacts to the player's decisions. For example, one of the things James Bond is arguably most famous for, other than his questionable taste in drinks, is his gadgets. Q can outfit the player before a mission with an ever-expanding list of tools like a laser wrist strap for your watch or an explosive pen, with all of them having multiple applications out in the field for infiltration, manipulation, and combat. This is in stark contrast to Agent 47, who has to mostly improvise with what he finds in the levels themselves, forcing this kind of exploration. James has all of the solutions for nearly all of his problems on his wrist at all times, but there are trade-offs to this. Players can only take 3 specific gadgets into the field at once, and this limits their options, but also funnels them through specific routes that require those gadgets to access them. And also, these gadgets themselves can only be used so many times before running out of juice. Both restrictions facilitate further exploration. Yeah, in theory, because it didn't really turn out like that, did it? Because the battery-powered energy used for electronics or the improvised chemicals used for poison darts can be found in almost every single room, which is convenient, but it's too convenient, because instead of encouraging the same level of exploration to find the specific items needed for progression, you can just use the watch to solve any and all of your problems, and as you slip past your foes, you're then rewarded with refills for your fuckery. But you'd think having to choose your items before you go in would help force players towards gadget-specific routes, but not really. You could laser a guard directly in the eye, something that has been shown to cut through metal padlocks, and just walk past them, or steal a key off their ass, whatever you need, and they'll just go right back to whatever they were doing like nothing's ever happened. And these types of shenanigans need to be done because most of these guards don't have patrol routes. They just stand there, further forcing players into specific paths and using certain playstyles, and this trickles down to really dampen the espionage stealth aspect of the game. We spoke about it in our last episode on Metal Gear Solid, that bodies remaining after death is an important aspect of games of this ilk, for how a singular misplaced body can drastically domino affect enemy patrols and threat levels of other guards if bodies are left out in the open. But unlike in Hitman, in 007, bodies can't be moved. They just lay there, but that's fine because of the rigor mortis plague that the majority of its guards have contracted and the world's inability to react to what you do to it. You could kill a guard directly under a security camera and it won't react whatsoever, like screaming about it's above its digital pay grade. The clearest example of the guards reacting to the player is when they spot you, and this is actually another really interesting design shift. In most modern stealth games, direct combat is made intentionally awkward to facilitate punishment for mishaps or dynamic repercussions that alter the player's plans. But this isn't a stealth game, it's a stealth/action wombo combo with a huge limp leaning it towards action. So nearly all situations are solvable through direct combat, and luckily melee combat is dripping with game feel. Even if most of the enemies are spamming the same 4 moves, it always feels super punchy. But even though a good fistfight is nearly always the repercussion for failure, there's no domino effect here. You could be having a screaming, rip-roaring, knuckle-bust-up, smashing cabinets and broken glass flying everywhere, with guards 1 room over, only separated by a single pane of glass, blissfully unaware, picking their ass. But if you switch on a vacuum in a different postcode, they suddenly turn into Miss Marple. Now, jokes aside, the difference here is that switching on that vacuum is player controlled, and stumbling upon an accidental fight isn't. The world itself isn't reacting to your incidental inputs because from a designer's perspective, having this cascade of failure alerting the entire building to your whereabouts would be too much with its current systems and would lead to quick player death, and they don't want that. They want you to move forward to the next narrative moment. They're not trying to create a breathing sandbox for the players to endlessly experiment in. It wants its players to stumble into these manufactured Mission Impossible style situations where surely James can't get out of this one, but through direct combat or clever use of its gadgets, the player overcomes them. That's the goal. Tell James's story. They don't want the player snowballing into these situations that get out of hand unless it's something they've controlled, and this can be seen clearly with when the game gives James his license to kill. Now, it's been a little bit contentious online that this is something given to James rather than him having it outright, but one, it's built into the narrative because he doesn't have the "00" prefix giving him the license to kill yet because it's an origin story, so shut your cake hole, mate. But 2, I also think this is mechanically important too. Because this license to kill is only really granted to him in the game's more bombastic Uncharted-like section, it also creates these meaningful downtime sections, where the option to simply kill everyone isn't there. If that option was there, it would give the more trigger-happy players the ability to create hundreds of needless widows in situations where you're simply there to gather information or tail someone, further compounding on this immovable body problem. And on a narrative note, that's kind of antithetical to what 007 is. And I think controlling James's license to kill is a really elegant solution to narratively restrict the player while telling Bond's origins. Yes, they could have given the player more choice, but that would be damaging to the story they wanted to tell. They intentionally hamper player expression in pursuit of better storytelling that suits the IP. While playing 007, Jay, the Hitman fan, missed a lot of that mechanical expression and freedom it facilitated, but I knew from a designer's perspective that that was the correct decision for the type of game they set out to make, and I'm glad that instead of giving us one more route to take, they instead diverted development time to a surprisingly complex bow-tie minigame. That right there, mate, is James Bond. And yes, Hitman in a lot of ways has better level design and mechanics, but First Light undoubtedly has a more compelling story, and I'm glad IOI cut the corners they did to focus on what this game specifically needed to tell that narrative, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this formula grows into its own in its hinted sequels. What's that? Oh, so reports have just come out that the IOI are not going to be handling the publishing of the next 007 games, as Amazon are going to take over that. So there's a good chance that they won't even get to create the sequels. So all I'm saying is if it's not IOI, I don't buy. That shit don't fly and I'm not your guy. And if you need to ask, next episode's Majora's Mask. It's been one hell of a task. Yeah, come watch it on Twitch. There's no temples or bitch. And if not, I'll see you once it's done. Bye!